with just 48 hours to go for the first phase of elections for the Gujarat Assembly, the biggest question is how close is this fight? While predicting the outcome of any election is a foolhardy attempt, some indications have emerged in the form of at least 5 pre-election surveys done by various agencies. The broad direction these polls point to is a comfortable majority for the BJP, but with perhaps a slight dip from the 115 seats they currently hold in the 182-member assembly. This would also be a far cry from the 150 seats the BJP aims to get in this election. So is this going to turn into a close enough fight, or will the BJP push through, though with fewer seats? To speak on this, I'm joined this evening by Yashwant Deshmukh of C Voter and political analyst R. Jagannathan, who joins in on the conversation. Welcome to both of you. Yashwant, I'll begin with you because C Voter has put its figures out as well, and you're giving the BJP 109 seats with the Congress at 73. Would you call this a really close fight at this point?
Well, on the state, when you look at the vote share at the state level, it looks like a close fight. But the fact remains that the 4 different regions of Gujarat are in fact voting on 4 different scales, and there are quite a substantial variation as far as the voting intentions is concerned in Gujarat. So, for example, even in 2012, 5 years back, actually Congress had an upper hand in North Gujarat, and they won the majority of the votes and majority of the seats. That lead has gone up for the Congress. So Congress is getting more of the Patidar votes and likely to get the North Gujarat one-sided, one-way traffic. And the big change is happening in South Gujarat, where again the BJP vote share is going down and the Congress vote share is going up. And Congress is likely to end up winning a lot many seats than it had won last 5 years back. But let me remind all the viewers that there are only about 30-odd seats in these 2 regions, which makes it totally about roughly about 60+ seats. What is happening is that in Gujarat, rest of the 2 regions, that is Saurashtra and in the central Gujarat, they are 60+ seats each, almost about 60 seats each. So in Saurashtra, for example, which is going absolutely the other way around as far as the Congress-BJP equation is concerned. Saurashtra was the region where actually 5 years back, Keshubai Patel's party was contesting big time. They polled almost about 10% of the votes in this particular region, which resulted in big number of loss of seats for BJP, courtesy the split of the votes. But what is happening in Saurashtra is that the split of the Leva Patels, which were the Patel caste supporting Keshubai Patel and going in favor of Keshubai Patel last time, they are going back to the BJP lock, stock and barrel after Keshubai Patel party getting merged into the BJP. So in Saurashtra, actually the lead of the BJP is getting even further. So it is very much likely that whatever the loss that BJP is incurring in South Gujarat and in North Gujarat, it is more or less getting subsidized by their gain in Saurashtra region or the Congress loss in Saurashtra region. So now, when this is all even, then the final battle remains in the region called Central Gujarat, which is also known as the epicenter of the 2002 riot region as we know it. Central Gujarat is the key area where the contest is going to be. It looks like it is very a close contest right now in Central Gujarat, but that again, Central Gujarat is split into 2 different ways. One is the urban area, urban concentration, and one in the rural area. Congress is having an upper hand in the rural areas, and BJP is having an upper hand in urban areas. And let me remind the viewers that it is the number of the seats. Gujarat is the most urbanized state one of the most urbanized states in India, and number of the urban constituencies in Gujarat is much more than the rural constituencies. So, keeping that in mind, it will be the Central Gujarat region which would decide the fate. If BJP maintains the stronghold in the urban areas of Central Gujarat, it will sail through. If it doesn't, then the contest might become keener.
Of course, Yashwant, you are a pollster, and that's why you look at all of this data in so much detail and, of course, have the confidence to predict what the outcome could be. But for the rest of us, I think, Mr. Jagannathan, one key question would be that how the whole narrative seems to have changed over the last few months. I would say even 6 months ago, few would have predicted such a close fight. Like even what Yashwant is currently describing, where the Congress would look like it even has a fighting chance.
Absolutely. I think this time the Congress has managed its narrative pretty well. They steered clear of all the 2002 references. They, in fact, kept an arm's length from most of the minorities. And Rahul Gandhi has been hopping from temple to temple to say that he is not an anti-Hindu. In fact, he's a Shiv Bhakt and he's a, sacred thread-wearing Brahmin. That's the kind of stuff that he's been doing, which is a bit unusual. I don't think he needed to do that much, but the fact is the Congress is now focusing on the pain points in the economic side, which is GST, demonetization, rural distress. So I think the narrative they have kept on the economics, which is why the BJP has been on the back foot. It is only towards the last few days that they started doing things like, the Kapil Sibal statement on the Sunni Waqf vote and delaying their hearings, and then you have Mani Shankar Iyer talking some nonsense about niche Rajniti and all that stuff. So I think the issue is a little changed now, but I think the big picture is something like this. I think it is a tough fight for the BJP for this time because they have 22 years of anti-incumbency to live against. Other thing which is consistent across all polls, even though many polls give the BJP a higher number of seats, one thing that is consistent in all polls is between, say, August and the last poll in the end of November.
Okay, I'm losing your voice there. I'm losing your voice there,
Trend
Jaggi.
tends to go a little further than where the... Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, to complete that point.
Yeah. I think whenever the trend is going in one direction, it tends to go a little further on election day. So, the CSDS poll put the vote shares of both parties at 43%. Others, of course, have put a gap of 4 to 5%. But the trajectory of the margin is going down consistently in all the polls. So we do not, which is why it's difficult to say now that the BJP is home and dry. They may just scrape through, and maybe these last 2-3 days where all these niche Rajniti and all these things have come might just help the BJP scrape through. But it's on a tough wicket. I think this time, if they pull it off, it'll be quite a miracle.
Yeah, and it would be perhaps with some thanks given to Congress leaders and veterans like Kapil Sibal and Mani Shankar Iyer, if those are issues in the Gujarat election. And that's the other question, Yashwant, really. That what are the issues? Because in this election, we've seen both sides talk about a number of things, and I'm going to focus on issues that the BJP and specifically Prime Minister Modi have raised in his rallies. He's talked about Rahul Gandhi becoming the president without a real election of his own party and calling it Aurangzeb Raj. Now he's talked about, niche Rajniti based on what Mani Shankar Iyer said. Are all of these issues that the voters care about? What have you found in your surveys as, you have spoken to, or your organization has spoken to a broad spectrum of voters? What are their issues?
But the issues are always have been the anti-incumbency at the micro level. That is the non-performance of the sitting MLAs. That has been always an issue. BJP has been pulling out this issue for the last 22 years by just switching off the candidates, changing the candidates big time and fighting the anti-incumbency by clipping off the tickets of the non-performing MLAs. But they had a big asset of Prime Minister Modi, who was the Chief Minister till that point of time, to carry on the message home and dry. Right now, the issue is that while Mr. Modi is the Prime Minister and he is very much going for the question of Gujarat Asmita, he is not there personally in the front as the Chief Ministerial candidate. But at the same time, it remains to be seen that the one thing we must, I totally agree with, Mr. Jagannath's assertion that, in the trend line, the gap is closing down in all the polls. But keeping in mind one more important thing in the data point, that all the data collection, all the surveys were completed when the Congress campaign was at the peak and Mr. Modi had not yet even started his campaign. So, in other words, whatever the trend and indicators that we are watching in the data lines are also reflecting the worst for the BJP, that now that the worst for the BJP is over and the Prime Minister has started his campaign, I believe that a lot of critical damage control that can be done would be through the campaign of the Prime Minister alone. We know that Gujarat has had no other issue, barring Mr. Modi, per se, since 2002. So keeping in mind, and this is very critical factor to consider, that all the polls, all the survey numbers that you are watching are till the date when the Congress campaign had peaked and till the date when Mr. Prime Minister had not even started the campaign in Gujarat. So a lot would change. We all agree on that eventually it will bottle down to what kind of campaign Mr. Modi does and what kind of response does he get. Whether or not he is able to carry Gujarat BJP on his shoulders once again, that remains to be seen. But yes, we have to give due credit that whatsoever BJP has been winning in the last 3 years across India has been solely on the campaign of Mr. Modi. So if Mr. Modi can have an effective campaign across India, it is unlikely that his campaign will not have any impact in his home state. And there is no data to capture right now because his campaign started really late into the schedule.
Mr. Jagannathan, one factor that Yashwant has talked about is Prime Minister Modi coming in and really more aggressively pushing in his campaign. That will definitely make a difference. The other factors also that the Congress managing to stitch up those alliances, getting Hardik on board, sorting out, seat sharing with Jignesh. Alpesh Thakur was of course on board earlier. Do these three young Turks, so to speak, hold any great role, or is it just a bit of hype in your view?
No, I think they will certainly move the needle towards the Congress to some extent. But as always is the case, whenever you bring in a caste angle into the polling, when one caste moves in one direction, the castes that are antagonistic or see themselves at a loss when this caste moves ahead tends to swing in the other direction. So overall, there may be a marginal positive move towards the Congress because you've got Alpesh Thakur, Jignesh Mewani and Hardik Patel moving in the direction of the Congress. But the other Patels, some Patidars and others might be moving in the other direction, thinking that they might lose out in this if one section starts moving in a different direction politically. That has always been the case in India in almost every state. So I don't think it will be any different in Gujarat. But yes, there will be a 2 to 3% swing because of these young leaders. And unfortunately, the young leaders have positioned themselves in a very narrow way. If they had merely positioned themselves as youth leaders and cut across caste appeal, then they would have posed a bigger challenge. But what has happened is they have reduced themselves to small caste leaders, which means that their impact will be a little limited. So I don't think that thing. It is mostly, I think the Congress has got its narrative right. It has got some wider alliances going, and it has got its narrative right. That is the most important thing, that they have tried to avoid references to 2002, which tend to immediately polarize the voters, because in Gujarat there is not much difference between the average Congress voter and the BJP voter. Both of them have had a slight anti-minority bias in undercurrent of it. So that, I think the Congress is playing to that cards. Keeping that in mind.
To ask you one last question, Mr. Jagannathan, if the Congress does find some success in their Gujarat campaign, and we'll of course know that on the 18th of this month, do you think that this will become a template for them, that stay away from the minorities, no longer speak about minority rights, and that perhaps will see us through?
No, I think Gujarat is probably a little more unique in that sense than elsewhere. But I think, yes, I think if the Anthony report that came after 2014 very clearly said that the Congress is seen as too pro-minority and possibly anti-Hindu, and that needs to be toned down. So my guess is they will do some course correction there and not talk too much on the minority side, so that they have to win back the core Hindu vote if they have to make a bid for power in 2019. So I think that course correction is being made. But the point is, if the Congress plays soft Hindutva, they are ultimately playing into the BJP's hands. Because if you want to, why vote for the B team when you can vote for the A team in Hindutva? So I think it's just a short-term tactic. It might just work here and there. But as a long-term tactic, it's a self-defeating thing for the Congress because its positioning goes for a toss.
Okay. Thank you so much, R. Jagannathan and Yashwant Deshmukh, for speaking with us. 5 polls out. We've shown you most of them. Poll of polls show the BJP with a lead in a majority, but short of perhaps what they expected and they got last time. Is it going to be that close of a fight? Well, of course, we'll have to see on the 18th. Donald Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital has caused huge geopolitical ripples across the world. 8 countries of the 15-member UN Security Council have called for an emergency meet to discuss this move. Hamas has called for another intifada, while the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has hailed it as a historic move. But the most important views right now, perhaps, are from people on both sides of the conflict or who represent both sides of this narrative. To give us a sense of that, I'm joined this evening by Udi Shaham. He's joining us from Jerusalem. He is Jerusalem Affairs and National Police reporter with the Jerusalem Post. I'm also speaking this evening with Ghanem Nosibi, founder Cornerstone Global from London, and he's a foremost expert on, of course, the Arab world. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Udi, and please forgive me if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but tell us what is happening right now in Jerusalem after that big announcement. What are the responses like, and how are people reacting to the biggest nations of the world condemning Donald Trump's move?
So at the moment, there are no protests going on in East Jerusalem. But we witnessed this morning sort of wide-scale demonstrations at the Damascus Gate, which is essentially the central hub for Palestinians in East Jerusalem. Palestinians have mainly expressed their disappointment of President Trump, and they were saying that he basically proved that the U.S. is biased and is on Israel's side. We haven't seen here in Jerusalem, I'm not talking about the West Bank or Gaza, but in Jerusalem, no serious injuries or major arrests as we witnessed in the summer when protests took place over placing metal detectors in the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Odi, are people happy? Are they celebrating? Or are there questions within the city as well of what will this do in the days to come, or what the impact will be?
So obviously on the western side of Jerusalem is divided. The western part is Jewish, the eastern part is Palestinian. The western side is pretty much happy with the decision. There are obviously some calls by the Israeli left that are distancing themselves from the announcement, saying that how maybe it is good for Israel, but it might be bad in the wider picture. The eastern part is, as we can see, against this move. And as I said, they're expressing deep disappointment from the U.S. administration that have facilitated peace talks in the past 25 years.
Sure. Ghanem is also joining us from London for perhaps another perspective. Ghanem, how would Palestinians be looking at this right now? And would there be some sort of succor in the fact that a lot of nations, France, Britain, Saudi Arabia, of course, across the Arab world have come out and, spoken very strongly against this move by President Trump?
Well, the first point is the Palestinians are obviously extremely upset, but it's not just the Palestinians. As you rightly said, there is a blanket global condemnation of the of Trump's move. I think this has really united the whole world, not against the United States as such, but perhaps against Trump. And as the other guest rightly said, there's not even a unanimous support for the Trump move in Israel. Obviously, that's the short term. The long term has severely undermined the ability of the United States to say that it is an impartial peace broker, and other players will have to get involved if a peace broker that is acceptable to all sides is going to be able to broker peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
Let's look at the immediate and then the long-term impact, Ghanem. The Hamas, of course, has threatened another intifada. Do you see the possibility of an outbreak of violence over the next few days and, that entire situation escalating?
Well, I mean, it's a very volatile situation. I don't think the problem is an immediate outbreak of violence. The problem is a more long-term one that undermines the overall potential of achieving a long-term peace. The Middle East has been very fragile in the past few months and years, and this is like literally a bull walking into a china room. It has upset a lot of a delicate balance that has been gradually building up with the moderates versus the extremists of the region. So yes, there is a possibility of immediate violence, and I hope that does not escalate. It's impossible to predict. We've had, for example, about 16 years ago, the visit of Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that led to a 6 or 7 year cycle of violence, the second intifada. That wouldn't have been predicted then. It's impossible to predict how this will be. Generally, I don't think the Palestinians or the Israelis want to see violence. So I hope that will not materialize into another cycle of violence, but it's impossible to predict. As I said, the important thing is the long-term repercussions rather than an immediate risk of violence that would subside sooner or later.
That's a very interesting point. And Udi, if you could give us some perspective, sitting all the way here in Mumbai, India, that the average man on the street in Jerusalem, even on the Israeli side, as you describe it, is this now the biggest issue in the world for them? Do they care enough about this issue to take on whatever may come as a repercussion?
I think that for the Jewish side, this was big news, and we've all seen this morning on the front pages. It was all about Trump's declaration, but I don't think that this is changing the world. However, in the Palestinian side, we do see this move as a game changer, as in we have nothing to lose anymore. And when I talk to people here on the street in East Jerusalem, and I ask them, when do you think that this demonstration or protest will finish? They say, we don't know. It will go on for years. And some are talking about another intifada breaking now. Police, however, are saying that there are no real indication of guided resistance from political faction, and it's all popular resistance.
Of course. Ghanem, just a broader question on, a lot of world leaders, of course, have come out and condemned this move. Is it going to just end at the point where it is, this is how it will be because Trump said so, because America said so, or do you think that some of that pressure will prevail? Is there any way to sort of mute or soften the corners of the situation?
Well, Trump has proved to be extremely unpredictable. King Abdullah of Jordan, who's the custodian of the Christian and Muslim holy places in Jerusalem, as per the peace treaty between Israel and Jordan, was in D.C. a week before the decision. And clearly that is a disappointment, the decision of Trump. So there is a lot of unpredictability with Trump. Clearly, the United States as a country, people in the State Department, people in both parties, would like to make sure that the United States maintains a political position in the peace process between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, between Israel and Palestine, and whether that would happen under Trump or after Trump leaves is, it remains to be seen. But it does certainly has diluted the influence of the United States in the region, and I think what the United States would be looking now to do is perhaps increase their influence by reaching out to the Arab world and particularly to the Palestinians and reassuring them that that they would be willing to get out of their way to ensure that there is a resemblance of greater balance, which is very difficult to achieve. Under Trump, I don't see this happening. He panders mainly to an evangelical constituency in the United States, in Alabama, with the elections coming up, and he really cares absolutely not much about what happens in Israel and Palestine and the rest of the Middle East. I think the problem now is Trump rather than the United States.
Yeah, maybe perhaps a lot of people have that view as well. But Ghanem, just one quick point on what you see happening from the powerful Arab nations. Do you see Saudi Arabia perhaps taking a more stronger stance than what they have said so far and being able to exert that kind of pressure on the United States, or will none of it work on Trump?
Well, Saudi Arabia has issued an extremely strongly worded statement against the Trump administration yesterday, early morning, in the early hours of the morning. Obviously, Saudi Arabia doesn't have any relations with Israel, so there's a limit to what it can do. But I have no doubt that Saudi and other Arab officials will be putting a lot of pressure on the Trump administration in order to reverse or at least compensate for the decision it has made in Jerusalem. Yes, absolutely. The Arab nations are all, and governments in particular, are very upset because it has disturbed a balance that disturbs and disrupts the unity that has been created in a united front against the war against terrorism and extremism. This has all been disrupted, I'm afraid.
All right, thank you so much, Ghanem Nasebe, as well as Uri Shaham, from the Jerusalem Post, who joined in on this conversation to give us a sense of what people are saying in Jerusalem and what are the views coming in from the Palestinian side. That's all the time we have this evening on Primetime Debate, but do keep your views and comments coming in. We'd love to hear from you.